Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is Michelle Mitchell, Tribal Education Department Head and Advisor to the Flathead Youth Council. Thank you for joining us for the Flathead Youth Council's presentation for Tribal PIR Day 2023. Unfortunately, the students' voices will not be a part of this presentation, but their faces and all of their information and excitement will be. So prepare yourself for a journey. We're going to cover the background, the current council themselves, initiatives and accomplishments, and what the future holds for the Flathead Youth Council. The Flathead Youth Council is a newly formed group of students under the direction of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Tribal Education Department. The group was formed last academic school year and has representatives from each high school on the Flathead Indian Reservation. The council themselves represent many different tribes across the United States, which is reflected on the outside border of their logo, which you will see later in this presentation. Back in 2020, before COVID, I was at a meeting with the Flathead Youth Initiative and brought up the idea of a leadership group with representatives from each high school, modeled after a group that I started in Great Falls called Intertribal Strong. And the kids were super excited about it. Well, right after that meeting, we all went into lockdown for COVID, and I just kind of forgot about it until last year in the fall. I was at another Flathead Youth Initiative meeting and they brought it up. And it reminded me that I needed to do what I said I was going to do. And so that started the process of thinking about what this group would be and how we were going to recruit students, which ended up being advertising it in the Charcusta and getting the word out to all of the school districts. So after we advertised in the Charcusta for 2 weeks, and we notified all of our connections at each of the high schools, we ended up extending the deadline into January once the kids returned from Christmas break. It fell in a really difficult time of year when it was impossible to get kids to follow through. And we'll make sure that we do it differently this year. So then the next thing that we did was we made sure that the applications were complete. So we screened them for completeness. And then we had the committee review them and pick their top 2 selections from each school. Once that was done, we notified the council and we got us all together. I want to take a second to talk about the application itself. So the primary things that were involved were 2 questions and 2 letters of recommendation. So those 2 questions were, what does it mean to be a leader? And the second one is, what kind of a change do you want to see in your community? And then in addition, they had to have 2 letters of recommendation, one from a counselor or a teacher, and one from an elder or a community member. And in addition to that, their applications had to meet the deadline, they had to be complete, and they needed to identify as an American Indian student. The applications were then reviewed after identifying information was removed, and the committee made their selections that way. Once the Flathead Youth Council members were selected, they were notified in writing by the mail and also by their teachers. And then we reached out to each of them and began planning the first in-person meeting with them, which occurred on April 13th. And at that time, we discussed meeting at Quatucknook for an entire day, which is what we ended up doing. Not all of the students were able to make that first meeting and also missed out on the group picture, but they all stepped up after that initial meeting and were able to make the meetings that they scheduled weekly with me via Zoom or in person. At the very first meeting, it was really about me sharing my idea and my thoughts with the kids, but then handing the reins over to them. And so we talked a lot about what they want to do. And I would say the first half of the day, they kept looking to me for reassurance and saying things like, "What, can we do this? Is it okay if we do that?" And my response is always, "I don't know. Can you? Are you able to? Is this what you want to do?" Until they finally understood that this was theirs, and they started to take ownership of it. And the first step in that process was them changing it from the CSKT Youth Council to the Flathead Youth Council. So not so much specific to the tribes, but specific to our homelands. And I was really proud of them for that move being their first move. So in addition to changing their name to the Flathead Youth Council, at the first part of their first meeting in person, they discussed what type of leadership they would have, and they decided that everyone would have a voice and that they were not going to elect officers. They decided how often and when and where they would meet. So they decided to meet weekly, and we meet every Wednesday at 7 o'clock via Zoom and then once a month in person. They also determined that volunteerism would be a big part of who they are, and they still continue to work on that, but so far it's been volunteering to clean up the highway and for elders. And then finally, their big initiatives are all based on the impact that they want to have in each of their communities, and we'll discuss those initiatives later. So to get the kids to start working together, I actually started the day off with a couple of icebreakers, and I had them go with their partners from their school to go and do those activities with people from different schools. And so in this picture, you see Two Eagle River School students and St. Ignatius High School students. And they were coming up with their answers for the icebreakers and getting to know each other at the same time. The job was to share what the others said so that they would pay attention to each other and then share that information with the bigger group. One of the things that we discussed early on as the Flathead Youth Council was the importance of us not taking shots at each other's schools. So no one's allowed to, like, for instance, Ronan can't bash Polson and Polson can't bash Ronan and any of the other students, because even though it can be done in good fun when there's competition going on, it can get carried away too, and people might not necessarily react at the time, but they internalize that and feel bad because somebody said something about their school, and they identify as a member of that community. So the kids all agreed that as long as we're together, whenever we get together, that's not something that we will joke around or poke fun at. And it was really a powerful conversation, and I'm glad that we had it. So one of the things across the board from all of the groups, whenever they broke out into their groups and came back together, one of the common threads that they discussed was the need for more involvement of culture in their schools, with the exception of Two Eagle, who is completely based in culture. That those students really got to share some amazing things that go on at Two Eagle that other kids wish that happened at their high schools too. And so instead of turning that into a negative, we discussed ways to make that happen in the other schools. And we actually had Myrna Dumontier with us, a knowledge keeper, who joined the conversation and said that there are many people willing to come and do that for the kids. This group of students represents Ronan and Hot Springs, and their discussion really was focused on mentoring younger students because they all either had younger siblings or younger cousins that they would love to bring along on a positive path to either be in leadership roles as tribal students or to also share culture with their fellow students. And so their ideas were to kind of have a traveling group of them that worked maybe one day every other week with elementary students so that they could either be in a leadership role or share culture with their fellow classmates. One of the amazing things that happened, besides all the other amazing things that happened that I've shared with you on that day, was the energy that the students have. Right here, you're looking at Abigail Lee, and she was so excited about the powwow, stick game, and 3-on-3 tournament ideas that she was writing down her ideas while everyone else was still finishing up their meal. And I just wanted to share this picture and just show what it means to these kids to be a part of something like this. And you're going to see when I share pictures of the powwow how amazing it went and how proud these kids are of having done this. And so I want you to keep that in mind as you go through this presentation. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the logistics of the Flathead Youth Council, and it's going to take me 2 slides to get through this timeline because a lot has happened in a short amount of time. So as you can see on the timeline, in December the applications were sent out. We extended the application deadline into the first week of January. Then in March, the members were notified. In April, they had their first meeting. Then in May, they held their first Pay It Forward event, which was a highway cleanup project, which you'll learn more about. In June, they began meeting weekly via Zoom, and they began planning their fundraisers. In July, they planned their second in-person meeting and planned their Indian taco sales. And I'll explain more on the next slide. So after July of 2023, we went into August, in which they held their Indian taco sales on the first Wednesday of August in 100-degree weather. They earned $1,000 and held on to that for the powwow in September. They met in person up at Vandenberg encampment, and at the same time they were interviewed by the Charcusta. In August, they also introduced themselves to Tribal Council and shared their hopes and dreams. And they volunteered at the back to school kickoff events for the Tribal Ed Department. In September, they hosted their first ever 7th generation powwow on September 8th and 9th, and it was a huge success. Okay, so now we've talked about how we got to be where we are. Now let's talk about the Flathead Youth Council themselves. We're going to find out what their names are, where they go to school, and just maybe one or two things about each of them. The current council has been a part of the program since March, and they are beginning the efforts to recruit replacements who either graduated or decided to step away from the council. We did have one member do that, or for slots that weren't filled in last year's recruitment. And here they are from left to right: Ezra Fasthorse, Seisha Fry, Hannah Medina, Brandy Bigby, Abigail Lee, Brett Myers, Sanjay Smallboy, Keithetta Kwikwisu, Paisley Couture, Alyssa Pretty on Top, and Angelia Sheridan. Each of the following high schools have two representatives from their schools. Arley High School has Seisha Fry and Sanjay Smallboy. Mission High School has Keithetta Kwikwisu and Paisley Couture. Polson High School has Abigail Lee and Ezra Fasthorse. The following high schools have one representative at this time. Hot Springs High School has Angelia Sheridan. Ronan High School has Brett Myers, who is a recent graduate. And Two Eagle River School has Brandy Bigby. Now to meet each individual council member. Seisha Fry is a junior in Arley. She attends Arley High School and was an amazing arena director for the Flathead Youth Council's 7th Generation Powwow on September 8th and 9th. Sanjay Smallboy is a senior at Arley High School, and he is reservation famous for his artwork. He designed the logo for the Montana Tribal Youth Conference in Billings last spring, and he also designed the logo for the Flathead Youth Council, which you will see later in this presentation. He also was a partner to Seisha and did an amazing job as an arena director at the Flathead Youth Council's 7th Generation Powwow. Next, we have Angelia Sheridan, and she is a senior at Hot Springs High School. And don't let her size fool you. She was the boom operator at the Flathead Youth Council 7th Generation Powwow this last or 2 weekends ago. And that means that between her and Abigail, they held the microphone up over each drum group during the entire song as they were singing for 2 days straight. She did a great job. Keithetta Kwikwisu is a senior at St. Ignatius High School, and as they were planning the powwow, her connections became instrumental in the head woman and head man dancers for the powwow. As the first group of kids that they contacted either couldn't or weren't interested in taking those roles for the powwow. So Keith Etta actually secured both of those students into participating. Her and Paisley also did all of the contest registration, and they marked down the people for grand entry, which is no small task. Paisley Couture is a senior at St. Ignatius High School, and she recently stepped out of her comfort zone to record the video for Tribal PIR Day for me that's titled Message to the Teachers. She also helped with registration at the powwow and counting the numbers at grand entry, each grand entry. Abigail Lee is a sophomore at Polson High School and our youngest member of the Flathead Youth Council. She was also recently crowned Miss Kootenai, which will be for this year, and she is a huge help at the powwow. Her role was head judge, so she selected judges as well as helped Angelia hold the boom over the drums during the entire powwow. Abigail is a go-getter, and we're lucky to have her. Ezra Fasthorse is a senior at Polson High School. He also is a football player and a basketball player, but he didn't let his football practice during the summer interfere with his help with the Flathead Youth Council. He's a go-getter and a great helper, and he was the all-around help guy at the powwow. Alyssa Pretty on Top was not with the Flathead Youth Council for very long. Once we met in April, she graduated just 2 months after that, but she still participated in the highway cleanup project, and then she stepped down from the council after that activity. Brandy Bigby is a senior at Two Eagle River School. In addition to being a part of the Flathead Youth Council, she's a part of 4-H, and she actually won one of 2 awards for the state, and she got to go to Las Vegas last spring. She also was the MC for the 7th Generation Powwow and did a phenomenal job. Brandy Bigby is a senior at Two Eagle River School. In addition to being a part of the Flathead Youth Council, she's a part of 4-H, and she actually won one of 2 awards for the state, and she got to go to Las Vegas last spring. She also was the MC for the 7th Generation Powwow and did a phenomenal job. Okay, so now it's time to talk about some accomplishments that these amazing leaders have had. And obviously, the first one is just the fact that they hit the ground running and just took off. So, after having met, they actually started talking about the design of this logo before we even left that day. And so Sanjay knew what they wanted to see on it. The 4 areas that they're focusing on are culture, community, positive change, and leadership. And he drew pictures to go with each of those. But then if you look around, the outside border is actually the tribal names of the tribes that the kids represent. So, for instance, up on top, I see Kasanka, Absulika, and Pakani. So that's Kootenai, Crow, and Black. Okay, so now it's time to talk about some accomplishments that these amazing leaders have had. And obviously, the first one is just the fact that they hit the ground running and just took off. So, after having met, they actually started talking about the design of this logo before we even left that day. And so Sanjay knew what they wanted to see on it. The 4 areas that they're focusing on are culture, community, positive change, and leadership. And he drew pictures to go with each of those. But then if you look around, the outside border is actually the tribal names of the tribes that the kids represent. So, for instance, up on top, I see Kasanka, Absulika, and Pakani. So that's Kootenai, Crow, and Black. More accomplishments that they have under their belt are the Indian Taco fundraiser that I mentioned, which happened in front of Quicksilver. They earned over $1,000 that they put in the bank to put towards their powwow. Then on the bottom left picture is actually a picture from the Charcusta from their interview with Marianne Addison, which you can read online if you go to Charcusta and Google Flathead Youth Council. And then the top left picture is when they went and introduced themselves to the CSKT Tribal Council and talked about the things that they're doing, and most importantly, individually invited them to their 7th generation powwow. More accomplishments that they have under their belt are the Indian Taco fundraiser that I mentioned, which happened in front of Quicksilver. They earned over $1,000 that they put in the bank to put towards their powwow. Then on the bottom left picture is actually a picture from the Charcusta from their interview with Marianne Addison, which you can read online if you go to Charcusta and Google Flathead Youth Council. And then the top left picture is when they went and introduced themselves to the CSKT Tribal Council and talked about the things that they're doing, and most importantly, individually invited them to their 7th generation powwow. So I wanted to highlight this picture and then zoom in on the text that was on it, because they've already accomplished one of the major events on their goals. And so I just wanted to point out that, this group of kids have been meeting for 6 months and they already hosted a successful powwow. They are already beginning to plan the stick game tournament for winter break, which they started planning while we were at the powwow. Now, I don't know how we're gonna come around to a teen community center, but I have no doubt that these kids have what it takes to make something like that happen. Okay, now let's talk about their self-identified initiatives. First, they wanted to do a highway cleanup, and they came to this idea organically because on the way to our very first in-person meeting, the highway was atrocious and they decided that they wanted to do something about it. And so that was the first initiative. The second one came from one of the students who actually lives with his grandma and said that, things like yard work and working on vehicles and those kinds of things, that our elders really need that kind of help. The mentorship came from the Ronan and Hot Springs group, who want to involve their younger siblings and cousins in leadership and culture. And then the community engagement piece is all around because they all want to make a positive impact in their communities. So in this slide, we see 5 of the Flathead Youth Council who showed up on a Sunday morning to help do a highway cleanup project that was on the north end of Polson Hill going north. And the students were there for about 2 hours and cleaned up that entire section. And those vests we got from the Montana Department of Transportation, and the kids just did a great job organizing it, planning it, and then implementing it. That was their very first Pay It Forward project. Unfortunately for the elder support, I did not take pictures that day. But I can tell you it also occurred on a Sunday. and the kids got together, and it was a completely different group than the previous event. And we met at an elder's house in Arlee where they raked and cut down things and then loaded it up onto a trailer. And then we took it to the dump. We hauled it off for that elder. And she was so appreciative that she served us popsicles and soda as a reward. And it was a good day. It felt good to help the elder, and she was so appreciative. Okay, now their biggest initiative, community engagement. So I've been talking a lot about the powwow. In the next slide, you're going to see some details, and I'll give you all of the details. But they're also already in the works for planning a stick game tournament in the winter during Christmas break, and then a 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the spring during spring break, which we have to try to figure out which district's spring break we're going to try to schedule that around. But right now, we just know that those two events are up and coming for this group of kids. Okay, so now the powwow you've been hearing about. The seventh generation powwow was September 8th and 9th. September 8th was a social powwow, which means there was no contest category dancing, but there were 3 specials: a switch up, a potato dance, and an owl dance, and that was winner take all. And it was a really good time. The Flathead Youth Council were the judges, and everyone had fun. There were about 400 people in attendance that night. The next day was the contest powwow. We had 96 dancers registered and 8 drums, which is a really big deal for your first powwow. And we estimate that there was around twice as many people the second day, so about 800 people for September 9th. And we were there until 2 o'clock in the morning when we were awarding prizes. So the future for the Flathead Youth Council is bright. I wanted to show pictures of them smiling and having fun because we do that a lot, but also to let you know that these kids, as soon as I handed the reins over, they took the lead on everything that they're doing. So when I say that they ran a powwow, they planned it, they organized it, they created the poster, they determined who was going to be the MC and the arena director and the host drum and the head woman and the head man. And they did all of the things that grown-ups do. And then in addition, they trained for their positions. And so that first night they were learning how to do it. And then the next day they practiced during the first session. And then during the second session, the kids ran the powwow. And I can't tell you how many people came and congratulated us on that piece. So specifically in the future, the kids are going to continue to plan and engage in community engagement as much as they possibly can. They're going to solidify their plans for mentorship and start implementing that. They hope to support more elders and doing yard work, and as soon as the snow hits, probably start shoveling snow for them. And then right now, they are currently working on recruiting new members. So if you are in a high school and you're watching this, make sure and pay attention for the application to come out, and encourage kids that you think would be good for a project like this to participate, to fill out that application and get it submitted, because they do need a letter of recommendation from a counselor, a teacher, an elder, or a community member as well. So I'm going to take the opportunity to answer just a few questions that people ask me when they learn about this. The first one is, do the kids have to be enrolled tribal members of CSKT? And the answer is no. The kids have to identify as American Indian, and that is all. Another question that I get asked is, how did you get the kids to do that? I didn't get the kids to do anything. I got out of their way. And I think that as grown-ups, we have a hard time letting kids take the lead on things, especially when they make some missteps. But those are the best learning tools that there are. And so I didn't get the kids here, they got themselves here. And then the last question is, how do we get involved, or how do we get in contact with them? So my contact information is right here on this slide. The last thing I'd like to say is thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about the Flathead Youth Council 2023 and their presentation to Tribal PIR Day. If there's any questions or more information that you'd like to have, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, or you can reach out to any of the Flathead Youth Council members that are in your high school. Thanks.